The Tree of Life, A Study in Magic by Regardie. You must understand, therefore, that this is the first path to felicity, affording to souls an intellectual plenitude of divine union. But the sacerdotal and theurgic gift of felicity is called, indeed, the gate to the demiurgos of wholes, or the seat or palace of the good. In the first place, likewise, it possesses a power of purifying the soul. Afterwards, it causes a coaptation of the reasoning power to the participation and vision of the good, and a liberation from everything of a contrary nature, and in the last place produces a union with the gods who are the givers of every good. Iamblichus. Introduction to the second edition. Does a parent have a favourite child? Is there one, above all others, that secretly he feels is the apple of his eye? More often than not, despite all protestations to the contrary, there certainly is. So it is with me. In having been asked to write an introduction to this new edition of The Tree of Life, I feel a warm inner glow which combines a number of quite separate emotions. The book has special meaning for me that none of my other writing ever had. Primarily, there is a basic fact that it was the first book that emerged from my burgeoning spirit. A Garden of Pomegranates, a prior publication, simply expanded itself from a set of Kabbalistic notes I kept for several years, and that is all it ever was. The Tree of Life has been said to be the most comprehensive introduction available to the numerous, complex, and sometimes obscure mystical writings of Aleister Crowley. Both these books were dedicated to him who I served as a secretary for several years. Symbolically, both came to be gestures of independence from him. The Tree of Life also resulted in correspondence all over the world that has eventuated in several deep and abiding friendships. For these I am most grateful. Though this book contains many minor typographical errors, principally due to haste and the carelessness of youth, it has been found useful as a guide to the vast, complicated, and wonderful Golden Dawn system of initiation to which I am obliged. A debt must here be acknowledged. The 2 volumes of the Golden Dawn, Llewellyn Publications, St. Paul, Min. 1970, are alleged by some students to contain such diversified mass of information that a clear guide is a prerequisite to hew an intelligible pathway through its papers, rituals, and instructions. This new edition should provide such a guide. In the writing of the Tree of Life, I learnt much. It consolidated many isolated fragments of disconnected knowledge and experience. Correspondence indicated it has served others equally well. Apart from its flamboyancy and a tendency to adjectivitis, which were the hallmarks of my youth, some 35 years having elapsed since it was written, it was declared a sincere, simple guide to an intricate and otherwise obscure art. A British psychiatrist was so kind as to admit a sense of awe and, indeed, admiration that one in his mid-20s could have shown as much spiritual insight and capacity for synthesis evidenced in this book. Should this conclusion be valid, much credit has to be given to Aleister Crowley, to whom I owe very much. To his ultimate vindication from the idiocy of biographers and muck-raking journalists, I have dedicated many years of my life. His material will never die. It will remain an inspiration to students of the distant future, as it has to me. Credit must also be given to my higher and divine genius to use the lovely Golden Dawn language, for without this inner direction, No literature, however profound, beautiful, or ecstatic, would mean very much, because the guidance obtained later from the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn resulted from the publication of the Tree of Life. Its writing was not influenced by the order. Subsequently, however, it did play a prominent part in my inner growth and the writing of later books. In retrospect, this testimony of my independence from Crowley resulted in a letter from the chief of one section of the Golden Dawn, condemning both me and the book in no uncertain terms. On the other hand, it resulted in an invitation to become a member from the chief of another branch of the order. I accepted the latter, though years later brought about a separation from the order. I now regret my youthful presumption and arrogance. Nevertheless, destiny must have intervened, resulting in a reissuance of the secret order teachings, the first exposure having been essayed just before World War I by Crowley in the Equinox. With due respect to Crowley's abundant genius, it has been said my presentation did more justice to the order than did his. It is worth repeating a second time that this new edition of the Tree of Life will give the student a bird's eye view of the Western magical tradition. In this connection, despite minor doctrinal and ritualistic deviations, Crowley stands in direct line of descendant from the adepts of the Golden Dawn. Nothing that he has written can be understood without reference to its teachings. Both the Golden Dawn and Aleister Crowley gain in stature and depth if the newcomer to these studies first obtains a synoptic view through the Tree of Life. Finally, a form of caution is still essential. I have long realized modern psychological analysis should be wedded to methods of the great work, a task yet to be fully accomplished. It is strongly recommended that the serious student undergo a course of some kind of psychotherapeutic treatment before proceeding too far with these practices. At the very least, he will have gained in self-awareness and eliminated a few bodily and emotional tensions exacerbated by magical art. So, to this new edition of the Tree of Life, I can only say with humility, sincerity, and conviction, go forth and spread the word. It depicts a good teaching, a noble philosophy, and an archaic thought, though practical system of attainment, of reaching sun-drenched heights, which all mankind ultimately must aspire and rest. May all readers obtain as much gratification, spiritual aid, comfort, and enlightenment as I have in the initial writing and in the subsequent years. Godspeed. Israel Regardie, May 12, 1968, Studio City, California, 91604. Introduction. By virtue of the widespread ignorance concerning the sovereign nature of the divine theurgy, despite frequent references almost everywhere to the subject of magic, a gross misunderstanding has been permitted to make its growth during the centuries. Few there today who would appear to possess even the vaguest idea as to what constituted the high objective of the system, considered by the sages of antiquity, the royal art and the transcendental magic, and because there have been even fewer in number prepared to defend to the last its philosophy and disseminate its true principles amongst those found worthy of receiving, the field of war, strewn with the mangled reputations of its magi, was relinquished to the charlatans. These, alas, made good use of their opportunity for wholesale despoliation, so much that the word magic itself has now become synonymous with all that is odious and is conceived to be an obnoxious thing. For several centuries, in Europe, was this unrighteous condition of things permitted. It continued for some while until about the middle of the last century, when Eliphas Levi, a writer with a certain facility of expression and a flair for synthesis and surface exposition, endeavoured to restore to magic its age-old lofty reputation. How his efforts would have fared had not they been succeeded and abetted by the advent of the philosophy of the Theosophical movement in 1875, together with the open discussion of occult and mystical matters which thereafter ensued, is exceedingly hard to say. Even so, they have been none too successful, for despite nearly 80 long years of attention and to the unconcealed discussions of the Eastern philosophy and practice in various of its branches, there can be found in the catalogue of the British Museum Reading Room, for instance, no single work on magic which attempts to provide a lucid, unambiguous, and exact exegesis, unhampered by too great an employment of symbol and figure of speech. 80 years of occult study, and not one serious work on magic. For some little has it been known in various quarters that the writer was a student of magic. As a consequence, enquiries would frequently be addressed to him as to its nature. So numerous did they become as time went on, and so abysmal was the unintentional ignorance of the subject that all displayed, that it seems high time to make available for the public a synthetic and definitive exposition, inasmuch as no other individual has attempted this task of paramount importance. Upon the writer devolves this difficult work. He does not propose to limit himself by specious remarks concerning the incommunicability of occult secrets, nor will he mention the impossibility of conveying the true nature of the mysteries of ancient time, as some recent authors have done. Though all this is true, nevertheless there is enough magic which is communicable, in spite of hundreds of pages, to elucidate against these writers. Also must be levelled the grim accusation of having done much to confirm public opinion in the already firm belief that magic was ambiguous, obscure, and fatuous. A greater misconception than this could hardly be held, for magic, let me insist, is lucid. It is definite and precise. There are no vague formulae or dubieties comprehended within the sphere of its exactitude. All is clear-cut and devised for practical experiment. Its system is absolutely scientific, and each part thereof is capable of verification and demonstrable proof. The Tree of Life is published somewhat hesitatingly, it is true, with the sole object of filling the existent gap. The writer desires to render intelligible and comprehensible to the ordinary intelligent layman, to the student of the mysteries and those versed in the lore of other mystical systems and philosophies, the root principle from which the tremendous, high-towering structure of magic is built, with one exception, not known or suitable to the public at large. Unfortunately, this necessary task has never previously been accomplished. The frequency of long quotations from the writings of magical authorities, which the writer has inserted herein, is quite simply explainable. It was due solely to the desire to demonstrate that the larger essentials of this exposition are not the outcome of any inventiveness of the writer, but are firmly rooted in the wisdom of antiquity, that there are crudities of expression, possible misinterpretations of fact or theory, sins of omission and commission. The writer needs hardly to be informed, by reason thereof he is humbly apologetic. He must be pardoned by virtue of his youth and inexperience. May his efforts spur some other more learned individual, gifted with greater facility of pen, and possessed of a more profound knowledge of the subject and its concomitants, to provide a better formulation of magic. The writer will be among the first to acclaim it with welcome and eulogy. It is also necessary to acknowledge the courtesy of Messrs. Methuen and Co. in extending permission to reproduce the illustrations of the 4 Egyptian gods from The Gods of the Egyptians by Sir A. E. Wallace Budge. Israel Regardie, London, August 1932. Chapter 1. Common expression on the lip. Chapter 1. A common expression on the lips of many is the reiteration that mankind today, with all its ills and aberrations, flounders blindly in a terrible morass. Death-dealing and with octopus-like tentacles of destruction, this morass clutches him more and more firmly to its breast, albeit with great subtlety and with stealth. Civilization, curiously enough, modern civilization is its name. The tentacles, which are the unwitting instruments of its catastrophic blows, reach out from the diseased structure, false and loathsome, of the decaying social system and the set of values wherein we are involved. And now the entire fabric of the social world appears in process of disintegration. The structure of national organization would appear to be veering from economic ruin to that final crazy lurch which may see it disappear over the gaping precipice to complete destruction. Rooted firmly in the fullness of the individual life, the hitherto stout bulwarks of our life are threatened, and never have they been before. More and more impossible does it seem, with the setting of each sun for anyone to retain even the slightest portion of his divine heritage, individuality, and to exert that which makes him man. Despite being born in our age and time, those few individuals who are aware with a certainty in which there is no doubt of a destiny, propelling them imperiously forward to the fulfillment of their ideal natures, constitute perhaps the sole exceptions. These, the minority, are the born mystics, the artists and poets, those who see beyond the veil and bring back the light of beyond. Included within the mass, however, is yet another minority who, while not fully conscious of an all-compelling destiny, nor the nature of its deeper self, aspires to be different from the complacent masses. With an inner anxiety, it is restless to obtain an abiding spiritual integrity. It is mercilessly ground underfoot by the social system of which it is a part, and harshly ostracized by the mass of its fellows. The verities and possibilities of a reintegrating contact with the reality, one which can be instigated here and now, abiding during life, and not necessarily upon the death of the body, are blindingly ignored. The attitude, singularly unwise, adopted by the wider part of modern intelligent European humanity towards the aspiration, continues a grave danger to the race. It has permitted itself only too eagerly to forget upon which it actually depends, and from which it is constantly nourished and sustained in both its inward and outward life. Avidly seizing upon the fluctuating evanescence of the hasty exterior existence, its negligence of affairs spiritual as well as its impatience with the more far-seeing of its fellows, is a mark of extreme race weariness and nostalgia. It is well-worn saying, but one none the less true and none the less worthy of repetition, inasmuch as it expresses peculiarly the situation now widely prevalent, that where there is no vision, the people perish. Mankind as a whole, or more particularly the Western element, has lost in some incomprehensible way its spiritual vision. An heretical barrier has been erected separating itself from that current of life and vitality which even now, despite willful impediment and obstacle, pulses and vibrates passionately in the blood, pervading the whole of the universal form and structure. The anomalies presented today are due to this rank absurdity. Mankind's slow accomplishing its own suicide. A self-strangulation is being effected through a suppression of all individuality with a spiritual sense and all that made it human. It continues to withhold the spiritual atmosphere from its lungs, so to speak, and having severed itself from the eternal and never-ceasing sources of light and life and inspiration, it has deliberately blinded itself to the fact that which no other could compare in importance, that there is a dynamic principle both within and without from which it has accomplished a divorce. The result is inner lethargy, chaos, and the disintegration of all that formerly was held to be ideal and sacred. Laid down centuries ago, the doctrine taught by the Buddha commends itself to me as providing a possible reason for this divorce, chaos, and decay. To the majority of people, existence is inevitably bound up with suffering and sorrow and pain. Now, although Buddha did teach that life was fraught with pain and misery, I am inclined to believe, when remembering the psychology of mysticism and of mystics, whose peer he undoubtedly was, that this viewpoint was adopted by him only to spur men forward from chaos to the attainment of a superior mode of life. Once the viewpoint of the personal ego, the outcome of ages of evolution, has been transcended, man may see the iron fetters of ignorance roll away to reveal an untrammeled vision of supreme beauty. The world is a living thing and a joy for ever and ever. Is there not for all to see the beauty of the sun and the moon, the pageantry of the changing seasons in the year, the sweet music of daybreak and the spell of nights under the open sky? What of the falling through the leaves of trees, towering to the gates of heaven, and the dew in the early morning, creeping over the grass, tipping it with spear points of silver? Most readers will have heard of the experience of the great German mystic Jacob Boehme, who, after his divine beatific vision, walked into the green fields close to his village, beholding the whole of nature ablaze with so glorious a light that even the tender blades of grass were resplendent with the divine loveliness and beauty that never had he seen before. Great mystic that the Buddha was, beyond perhaps any other within the knowledge of the average reader, and great his insight into the working of the human mind, it is possible to accept on its face value his pronouncement that life and living are a curse. Rather do I feel that this philosophic attitude was adopted by him in the hope that once again might mankind be induced to seek the inimitable wisdom which it had lost, to restore the inner equilibrium and the harmony of the soul, thus fulfilling its destiny unrestricted by sense and mind, preventing this ecstatic enjoyment of life and all that the sacrament of life can give. There is one root cause of sorrow, in a word, ignorance, because he is ignorant of what he really is in himself, ignorant of this true way of life. Man is, as the Buddha taught, so beset with sorrow and so sorely afflicted with distress. According to the traditional philosophy of the magicians, every man is a unique, autonomous center of individual consciousness, energy and will, a soul in a word. Like a star shining and existing by its own inward light, it pursues its way in the star-spangled heavens, solitary, uninterfered with, except in so far as its heavenly course is gravitationally modified by the presence, near or far, of other stars. since in the vast stellar spaces seldom are there conflicts between the celestial bodies, unless one happens to stray from its appointed course, a very rare occurrence. So in the realms of humankind there would be no chaos, little conflict and no mutual disturbance were each individual content to be grounded in the reality of his own higher consciousness, aware of his ideal nature and his true purpose in life, and eager to pursue the road which he must follow. Because men have strayed from the dynamic sources inhering within themselves and the universe, and have forsaken their true spiritual wills because they have divorced themselves from the celestial essences, betrayed by a mess of more sickly pottage than ever Jacob did sell to Esau. The world in this day presents a people with so hopeless an aspect and a humanity impressed with so despondent a mien. Ignorance of the course of the celestial orbit and the significance of that orbit inscribed in the skies forever is the root which is at the bottom of universal dissatisfaction, unhappiness, and race nostalgia. And because of this, the living soul cries for help to the dead, and the creature to a silent God. Of all this crying there comes usually nothing. The lifting up of the hands in supplication brings no inkling of salvation. The frantic gnashing of the teeth results but in mute despair and loss of vital energy. Redemption is only from within and is wrought out by the soul itself with suffering and through time with much endeavour to strain of the spirit. With much endeavour and strain of the spirit. How, then, may we return to this ecstatic identity with our deeper selves? In what way may this necessary union be accomplished between the individual soul and the essences of universal reality? Where is the road which leads eventually to the improvement and betterment of the individual and consequently to the solution of the perplexing problems in the world of man? The appearance of genius, regardless of the several aspects and field of its manifestations, is marked by the occurrence of a curious phenomenon, whose accompaniment is most always vision and ecstasy supreme. This experience, to which I have reference, is indubitably the hallmark and essential stigmata of genuine accomplishment. Not to mediocrity is this apocalyptic experience vouchsafed. To the commonplace person, burdened as he is with dogma and with an outworn tradition, there seldom comes that flash of spiritual light making descent in splendid tongues of flame like the Pentecostal Holy Ghost, radiant with joy and the highest wisdom, pregnant with spontaneous inspiration. The sophisticated, the blasé, the dilettante, these are debarred by insuperable barriers from the merits of its benediction. To those having talent alone, this revelation does not come, although talent may be the stepping stone of genius. Genius is not, nor has it ever been in years gone by, the result of merely infinite care and patience, but little importance, I think, need be attached to the oft iterated definition concerning a certain very high percentage of perspiration plus a very small remainder of inspiration. No matter how great the value of perspiration, it cannot produce the magnificent effects of genius. In every field of endeavour in daily life, on every side do we see performed a vast amount of excellent work, indispensable for what it is, and the shedding literally of quarts of perspiration without, in fact, the evocation of a fractional part of a creative idea or exaltation. These outward expressions, ingenious, care, patience, perspiration, are simply the manifestations of a superabundance of energy, proceeding from a hidden center of consciousness. They are but the media by which the genius distinguishes itself, striving to make known these ideas and thoughts which have been hurtled into the consciousness and penetrated that borderline which successfully marks off and divides the profane from that which is divine. Genius in itself is caused by or proceeds concomitantly with a spiritual experience to the highest intuitional order. It is an experience which, thundering from the Empyrean like a fiery bolt from Job's wheat, carries with it an instantaneous inspiration and an enduring uprightness with a fulfillment of all the yearnings of the mind and the emotional makeup. Into the primary cause of this experience, familiar to those rare individuals whose lives have been blessed from early childhood even to the lattermost days, I do not wish to inquire. Such an inquiry would make me far too afield, leading as it would to the realm of metaphysic and philosophic impalpabilities, into which I am for the moment unwilling to enter. Reflection, however, does yield one very significant fact. Those individuals who have received the title of genius, and named by mankind as the greatest, have been the recipients of some such inimitable experience as I have mentioned. A generalization it may be, but it is one which nevertheless carries with it the seal of truth. Many other lesser person whose life has been gladdened and brightened in a similar manner has been enabled thereby to accomplish a certain life work, artistic or secular, which otherwise had been impossible. Now it is a more or less logical postulate, one which follows as a direct consequence of the preceding premise, that were it possible by a species of psychological and spiritual training to induce this experience with this consciousness of various men and women of today, humanity as a whole could be exalted even beyond the highest conceptions, and there would arise a mighty new race of supermen. In reality, it is that goal whither evolution tends which is envisaged by all of the kingdoms of nature. From the beginnings of time, when intelligent man first appeared on the scene of evolution, there have existed technical methods of spiritual attainment by which means might be ascertained the true nature of man, and by which, moreover, genius is of the highest order developed. The latter, I might add, was conceived to be but the byproduct and terrestrial efflorescence of the discovery of the orbit of the starry self, and at no time by the authorities of this great work was in itself considered to be a worthy object of aspiration. Know thyself was the supreme injunction giving impetus to their high endeavor. If the creativity of genius followed as a result of the discovery of the innermost self and the tapping of the sources of universal energy, if inspiration by the muses ensued, or a stimulus in the direction of some art or philosophy or lay occupation, so much the better. At the outset of training, however, these mystics for these authorities came to be known, were completely independent to any result other than a spiritual one, self-knowledge and self-discovery, the word self being used in a lofty noetic and transcendental sense, were the primary objectives. If the arts have their origin in the expression of the soul that listens and sees, where for the outer mind are silence and the dark, then evidently mysticism is one and perhaps the greatest of the arts, the apotheosis apotheosis of artistic expression and endeavour. Mysticism, by some sweet ordinance of nature, has always and at all times has been always and at all times the most sacred of the arts. The mystic indeed bears with his bosom that tranquillity which oft times registers on the quiet face of the priest, uplifted to the altar. He is recognized intermediary of the and mouthpiece, the jewel keys being laid in his hands. He is both the ages and his fellows in the other arts admit more directly admitted to the sanctuary within and more immediately controlled by the psyche. It is for this reason that his successes are a success for all men at all times, but bitterly reprobated as almost a new ruin of Lucifer are his quite frequent failures. A bad poet or a bad musician is but a reproach to his particular art, and his name soon perishes from the memory of his people. A charlatan or an impostor magician, however, imperils the whole world, casting a heavy veil over the translucent light of the spirit which it was his principal duty to bring to the sons of men. It is for this reason also that he is only for the very few in every age, but likewise he is only for the few in all ages. Glorified with the beatitudes of all the priests and prophets of all the ages, he suffers ignominiously with their vilification, for they, like himself, are mystics. He is lonely. He is drawn away into subjective solitudes, where he is gone whither few can follow him unless they too have the keys. He is eulogiously acclaimed with song and dithyramb. Not a theoretical knowledge of the self is it that the mystic seeks, a purely intellectual philosophy of the universe, although that too has its place. The mystic seeks a deeper level of acquaintance, despite the rhetoric as to the absoluteness of reason. The logicians and philosophers of all time were inwardly convinced of the fundamental inadequacy and impotency of the ratiocinative faculty. Within it, they believed he was an element of self-contradiction which nullified its use in the quest for supreme reality. In proof of this, the whole history of philosophy stands as eloquent witness. It was the belief of these who were mystics, and experience repeatedly gave confirmation thereto, that it was only by transcending the mind, or that into the mind emptied of all content and made calm like a lagoon of still blue water, could a glimpse of eternity be mirrored. When the modifications of the thinking principle had been stilled or transcended, when the constant whirling which is characteristic of the normal mind has been quelled, and a serene tranquillity substituted, only could there occur that vision of spirituality, that lofty experience of the ages illuminating the whole being with warmth of inspiration and profundity, and a depth of imaginings to the highest and all-embracing kind. The technique of mysticism divides itself naturally into two major divisions. The one is magic, with its treatise will deal, the other is yoga. Now it is necessary to register a vehement protest against those critics who, in opposition to mysticism, by which term some possess as yoga or contemplation is under understood, posit magic as a thing completely apart, unspiritual, and of the earth gross. This classification I hold to the contrary to the implications of both systems and quite inaccurate. As I shall hereafter try to show you, yoga and magic, the reflective and exaltive methods separately, are both different phases comprehended in the one term, mysticism. However, often abused and misused as a word, mysticism is throughout this book used because it is the correct term for that mystical or ecstatic relationship of the self to the universe. It expresses the relation of the individual to a more comprehensive consciousness, either within or without himself, when, going beyond his own personal needs, he discovers his adjustment to larger, more harmonious ends. If this definition be in consonance with our views, then it is obvious that magic, also devised to accomplish that same necessary relationship, albeit by different methods, may not be satisfactorily placed against the other, and the advantages of one system panegyrically chanted as against the inadequacies of the other. For the finer aspects of magic are a part, as the best of yoga is also a part of that all-inclusive system of mysticism. On the subject of yoga, much has been written. Some of it rubbish, some little exceedingly worthwhile, but the whole secret of the way of royal union is contained in the second aphorism of the Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Yoga seeks to arrive at a reality by undermining the foundations of the ordinary waking consciousness, so that upon the tranquil sea of mentality which follow upon the cessation of all thought, the inner eternal sun of spiritual splendor could shine to shed an irradiation of light and life and immortality. To enhance the whole worth of man, all the practices and exercises in the yoga systems are so many scientific steps having as their one objective the complete abeyance of all thought at will. The mind must be thoroughly emptied at will of its content. Magic, on the other hand, is a mnemonic system of psychology in which the most interminable ceremonial details, the circumambulations, conjurations, and suffumagations are deliberately intended for the exaltation of the imagination and soul, with the utter transcending of the normal plane of thought. In the other case, the spiritual axe is laid on the root of the tree, and the effort made consciously to undermine the whole structure of consciousness in order to reveal the soul below. The magical method, as opposed to this, endeavours to rise altogether beyond the plane where trees and roots and axes exist. The results, in both cases, ecstasy and a marvellous outpouring of gladness, wildly rapturous and incomparably holy, is identical. It may be realized without difficulty that the ideal means of finding the perfect pearl, the jewel of untold price, though which one may see the holy city of God, is a judicious combination of both techniques. In any event, magic proves more efficacious and puissant when combined with the control of the mind, which it is the object of yoga to achieve. And likewise, the ecstasies of yoga acquire a certain rosy hue of romanticism and inspirational worth when associated with the art of magic. Needless to say, when I speak here of magic, I have reference to the divine theurgy praised and reverenced by antiquity. It is of a quest spiritual and divine that I write, a task of self-creation and reintegration, the bringing into human life of something eternal and enduring. Magic is not the popularly conceived practice which is the child of hallucination, begotten by savage ignorance, and which panders to the lusts of depraved mankind, because of the ignorant duplicity of charlatans and the reticence of its own scribes and authorities. Magic for centuries has been unduly confused with witchcraft and demonolatry, with the exceptions of but a few works which have either been too specialized in their appeal or distinctly unsuitable for the general public. Nothing has hitherto been issued to act as a definitive statement of what magic really is. This work does not pretend to deal in any way with the love charms, cows from giving milk, love charms, phylacteries, and potions, nor with amulets preventing one's neighbour's cow from giving milk, robbing him of his wife, and to ascertain the whereabouts of gold and hidden treasure. Such vile and stupid practices rightly deserve that much abused term black magic. With this aspect of things, this study has naught to do, although at the same time it is not to be understood that I deny the reality or efficacy of these methods. But if any man is anxious to discover the eternal font wherefrom the flame of Godhead springs, should that there be one who is desirous of awakening him himself, a more noble and lofty consciousness of the Spirit, and within those hearts whose hearts burn the aspirations to dedicate his life to the service of mankind, let such a one turn eagerly to magic. In its technique, peradventure, may be found the means to the fulfillment of the loftiest dreams of the soul. From academic resources, magic is defined as the art of applying natural causes to produce surprising effects. With this definition, and also with the view of a writer such as Havelock Ellis, that it be given a name to the whole stream of individual human action. I can't see this word. Are in complete accord, inasmuch as every conceivable act in the whole span of life is a magical art. What supernatural effect could be more astonishing or miraculous than a Christ, a Plato, or the Shakespeare who was the natural offspring of the marriage of the two peasants? What more marvellous and surprising than the growth of a tiny babe to the full maturity of manhood? Any and every excitation of the will, the uplifting of an arm, the utterance of a word, the silent germination of a thought, all these are by definition magical acts. The surprising effects, however, which magic seeks to encompass occupy a somewhat different plane of action than do those enumerated, although the latter, because they are so common, are none the less surprising and thaumaturgic. The results which the magician above all else desires to accomplish is a spiritual reconstruction of his own conscious universe, and incidentally that of all mankind. The greatest of all conceivable changes, the technique of magic, is one by which the soul flies straight as an arrow impelled from a taut bow to serenity, to a profound and impenetrable repose. But it is only man himself who may tauten the string of the bow. None else may accomplish this task for him. It is, of course, in this qualifying clause that lurks the flaw. Salvation must be self-induced and self-devised. The universal essences and cosmic centres are ever present, but towards them must man take his first step. Then, as Zoroaster has said in the Chaldean oracles, the blessed immortals are swift to come. The cause and maker of fate and destiny is man himself. As he acts, so must the course of his future experience be. Not only so, but the hollow of his palm rests the fate of all mankind. Not a large number of individuals will feel equal to awakening the dormant courage and the grim determination which masters the universe, that thus, by a road direct and free from obstacle, mankind may lead to a nobler ideal and a fuller, more harmonious mode of life. Were only a few men to exert themselves to discover what they really are and ascertain beyond all cavil the scintillating refulgence of bright glory and wisdom burning in the innermost heart, and discover the bonds connecting them with the universe, then I think they will have accomplished not only their own individual purpose in life and fulfilled their own destiny, but what is infinitely more important, that they have fulfilled the destiny of the universe considered as one vast living organism of consciousness. What is meant by lighting a candle? In this process, only the uppermost portion of the candle bears the flame, although only the wick is lighted. Yet customarily one speaks of the candle itself as being a light and illuminating the darkness around. In this many have found suggestive reference having significant application to the world at large. If only a few people in each country, each race, each people throughout the world find themselves and enter into a hallowed communion with the very source of life, then they, because of their illumination, become the wick of humanity and cast a resplendent and glorious aureole of gold over the universe. In those individuals who constitute a minute, almost microscopic minority of the populace of this globe, willing and eager to devote themselves to a spiritual cause, lies the only hope for the ultimate redemption of mankind. Eliphas Levi, the celebrated French magician, hazards a novel view which I think may have some bearing on this problem, and throws an illuminating ray on this proposition. Quote, God creates eternally, he writes. The great Adam, the universal and perfect man who contains in a single spirit all spirits and all souls. Intelligences therefore live two lives at once, one general, which is common to them all, and the other special and individual. This protoplastic Adam is called, in that Kabbalistic work named the Book of Splendor, the heavenly man, and it comprises in one being, as the erudite Magus observes, the souls of all men and creatures and dynamic forces which pulse through every portion of stellar space. I do not wish to enter metaphysics just at this moment, to discuss whether this primordial universe has been created by God, or whether it has simply evolved from infinite space. All I desire to consider now is that the totality of all life in the universe, vast and widespread, is this heavenly being, the Oversoul, as some other philosophers have known it, created forever in the heavens. In this cosmic body, we individuals and beasts and gods are the minute cells and molecules which, having a separate function to perform in the social polity and welfare of that soul. This philosophical theory admirably suggests that, as in the man of earth there is an intelligence governing man's actions and thoughts, so there is likewise, figuratively speaking, in the celestial man a soul which is its central intelligence and its most important faculty. All that which exists upon the earth has its spiritual counterpart on high, and there exists nothing in this world which is not attached to something above, and has not found independence upon it. So wrote the doctors of the Kabbalah. As in man, the grey cerebral substance is the most sensitive, nervous, and refined in the body, so also the most sensitive, developed, and spiritually advanced beings in the universe comprise the heart and soul and intelligence of the heavenly man. It is in this sense, in short, that the few who undertake to perform the great work, that is, to find themselves from a spiritual point of view, and to identify the whole consciousness with the universal essences, as Iamblichus terms them, all the gods who constitute the heart and soul of the heavenly man. These are the servants of mankind. They accomplish the work of redemption and fulfill the destiny of the earth. Mysticism, magic, and yoga is the means, therefore, to a new universal life, richer, greater, and more full of resource than ever before, as free as sunlight, as gracious as the unfolding of a rose. It is for man to take.